Gulliver tells us a bunch of boring things. At the beginning and end of part one, and at the beginning of part four, he goes into a lot of ridiculous detail that doesn't move the story forward about the name of the master of this ship and what date this happened and where he was. Getting down to on bottom of page 22, it's, this, we set out. We set sail from Bristol, May 4th, 1699, and our voyage was at first very prosperous. Gulliver always wants us to know how well he's doing financially, economically. This is something he's being mocked for. It's a kind of a Whig habit. He's bourgeois. He's a middle-class striver who's about making money and saving it up. And Swift is actually mocking this. This might seem odd for us to mock because it's become a heavy part of American values. But they're not Swift's values. He views them as that they're emerging 18th century values that he's against, that he is conservative, opposed to these values. He's also opposed to another set of values that are dear to 21st century America's heart. I'll get to that in a moment. After finding this, we get a discussion that it may not be proper for some reason to trouble the reader the particulars of our adventures in those seas. Let it suffice to inform him that in our passage thence to the East Indies, we are driven by a violent storm to the northwest of Van Diemen's Land. By an observation, we found ourselves in the latitude of 30 degrees 2 minutes south. 12 of our crew were dead by immoderate labor and ill food, the rest in a very weak condition. The 5th of November. Sometimes the dates may have a kind of political significance. The 5th of November is an important date in English-British history and is in fact a national holiday in Britain. Why he gets shipwrecked on the 5th of November, I leave up to you. 30th latitude, 2 minutes. Not just the 30 degrees, 2 minutes. Right? Exact. Why is there such an exact geographic position given of the shipwreck on the way to Lilliput? I've had students suggest before it's to make things more believable. In the same way, the kind of picayune, myopic, boring, everyday detail of how his law practice, his medical practice is going, and like how many pounds he had with how many pounds he got as a marriage proportion, and where he moved his house from London to outside London, and where is all for believability. Except nothing in this book is remotely believable. Stacking up the realistic detail at the beginning and end isn't gonna sell Lilliput. And Swift doesn't want you to believe in Lilliput. If you believe that Lilliput exists and goes looking for it, you've read this book wrong. And Swift is laughing at you. The joke here is on Gulliver. That quantifying, measuring, that he actually is going to give us very specific navigational details about a trip to nowhere, to a place that does not exist. Nowhere, mon frere. Why? One of the things that Gulliver and the Lilliputians are both mocked for is their, from Swift's view, excessive obsession with mathematics. Too obsessed with math. That's right. Swift is anti-math. It's not that he's anti-math. He's opposed to an empiricist and quantifiable and quantitative and scientific worldview, which was emerging in Enlightenment, the Enlightenment period, emerging during the 17th and 18th century in Western Europe. He is anti-Enlightenment. He is anti-science. One of the reasons Gulliver is an idiot and a sucker and a boob is because he is too scientifically inclined. He's involved in mechanics. He likes to invent things. He likes to measure things. He's good at math. These, to us, in the 21st century, all seem like things that should make you smarter. And I don't disagree with that. I don't think math is bad. Math is great. Science is good. Swift views this as part of a worldview that sees the details but gets everything wrong. The Lilliputians are in on it too. The Lilliputians are excellent at math and gifted at mechanics. Mechanics means what we would call physics and engineering. Gulliver talks about how he is mechanically inclined, so he could make stools out of some trees. Like, oh, he's cunning. He's a good tool maker. He's a little engineer, right? He's a guy who studied medicine and navigation and math and is good with tools. An entire kind of STEM, science and engineering worldview that Swift views as foolish and short-sighted. Part of the Enlightenment emphasis on science is an emphasis on empiricism, only believing what we can measure and observe, prioritizing observable fact over received wisdom. I don't know. Well, I don't know why we've always said disease comes this way. Let's count things. Let's measure things. The great 18th century question is, how tall is that? How deep is that? Notice Gulliver knows exactly how deep the channel between Lilliput and Blefuscu is, right? He's good at mechanics. The Lilliputians, who are tiny and short-sighted and vain, who understand the details but can't understand, pardon me for this one, the big picture, they are also obsessed with math. The very last paragraph of Part 1, Chapter 3, this is page 44 in our edition. The reader may please to observe that in the last article for the recovery of my liberty, the Emperor stipulates to allow me a quantity of meat and drink sufficient for the sport of 1,728 Lilliputians. Some time after, asking a friend at court how they came to fix on that determinate number, he told me that His Majesty's mathematicians, having taken the height of my body by the help of a quadrant, and finding it to exceed theirs in the proportion of 12 to 1, they concluded from the similarity of their bodies that mine must contain at least 1,728 of theirs, and consequently would require as much food as was necessary to support that number of Lilliputians. By which the reader may conceive the idea of the ingenuity of that people, as well as the prudent and exact economy of so great a prince. I want to come back to that last phrase in a minute. They have measured him with a quadrant, a kind of device for surveying and navigation. They have, whereas he's 12 times our height. And then they've done the math. He's 12 times bigger, times wider, times deeper. Okay, 12 to the third power is 1,728 exactly. We will give him 1,728 times as much food and drink. Right. He's exactly 1,728 times our size. Exactly. Notice there's no rounding. How ingenious, Gulliver says. He admires us because he is kind of, in his mind, already always a Lilliputian. He is interested in observable, countable phenomena. He is unable to step back and see the bigger picture. He misses real meaning and values in terms of, because he's caught up in tiny details. Swift is mocking an approach to science and math that was enormously fruitful, that made Britain the mighty empire it became in this period. He's also mocking a scientific revolution that was enormously fruitful. This was published around the year that Isaac Newton died. Isaac Newton, with all respect to Stephen Hawking and Alan Turing, Isaac Newton was the greatest English scientist who ever lived, one of the handful of greatest scientists who have ever lived. He had an enormously fruitful career, inventing calculus, discovering a mathematical model of gravity, understanding optics. Incredibly productive. That whole mindset, Swift views as too modern, wrong-headed, just a fad. I don't agree with Swift, but his position is that in that drive to empiricism, to studying the world only in ways that we can quantify, you lose some other kinds of values simply because you can't count them. Gulliver is very good at adding things around him and measuring things, but missing crucial important points. And it makes him petty. The Gulliver credits the 1728 calculation as, well, the ingenuity of that people. You know, you do have to be fairly good at math to realize it's got to be 1728. You got to measure the size, get the proportions. You cubed the number 12. You know about exponents. Fabulous. And then the prudent and exact economy of so great a prince. The Emperor of Lilliput. Here's the thing. 1728. Why not 1750? Why not 1730? No, 1728 exactly. Not 1729. He's only got 1728 shares of food a day coming to him. Because the emperor is careful and cheap. Yes, Gulliver is very expensive. He's a humongous giant. On the other hand, he's a humongous giant who can, like, destroy your enemy's whole navy at one go. So come on. Maybe worth the budgetary expense. Too cheap to round up. Too cheap to round up to 1730, right? Prudent and exact economy. Economy, meaning here money saving. He's prudent. He's exact. He's precise. He's a penny pincher of so great a prince. And even more than usual, though it's always the case, describing the Emperor of Lilliput as great, which also literally means big, he is not great. He is tiny. He is petty. And here, this is an example of his tiny pettiness. But Gulliver's all about it, because Gulliver and the Emperor of Lilliput share what Swift would consider a small-minded, quantitative approach to the world around them.